Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport in right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Thank you for returning to yet another episode of the Cycling in Alignment podcast. This conversation is with legendary frame builder Ben Serotta.
The world doesn't need another very good bike builder. If you're not doing something exceptional, why are you doing it? Our job is to deliver a bicycle that is impossibly good.
Ben has been building bikes since 1972, which is the year I was born. His craftsmanship and expertise in bike building are second to none. He also started and founded the Serotta International Cycling Institute, which was groundbreaking at the time. It was an institute to teach people how to fit bikes. This happened around the late 80s. Ben is a wealth of experience and a lifelong learner in the sport of cycling. I'm sure you will find his passion and knowledge engaging. Without further prevarication, please enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
All right. Well, you're looking pretty damn healthy.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So,
I'm a health coach, people might consider me a cycling coach, but really I consider myself a health coach because for me, health underpins your best cycling performance, and health underpins everything when we get down to it, right? So I would offer that, and this can play directly into our conversation. You know, one of the philosophies that many of my teachers share, including Paul Chek, who I'm studied with quite a bit, is that if you're going to coach someone, first of all, you can only bring to the table what you've really mastered yourself, or maybe not mastered, but at least attempted to grow in and learn from.
Right.
And also, as coaches in particular, we need to be living examples for our clients, right? Another way to say that is don't go to a sick, fat doctor.
Because I was just bring that up. I see a cardiologist who looks like you'd want your cardiologist to look like.
Yes.
He is lean, fit, bright, and but he's the only one like that in their practice, which is bizarre. It's like,
yeah.
It's like, have a fry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other guys, but anyway, I think you're absolutely right. And experiencing something is enough that you can share your experience, but it's not a basis for anything sort of approaching clinical practice. I don't mean clinical as in having to do with medicine, but anything fit. I mean, there's a connecting line between everything that we do. That's medicine is a piece of it, but it's just managing your helping somebody be a better, helping somebody live better, which is what you're talking about, and which is what bike fitting in its best form is as well.
Agreed. And making bikes, right? I mean, so last night I actually I do these walking podcasts sometimes where I just walk and sort of straight, from these hemispheres to this orifice, and was thinking about relationship to the bike. I sort of recorded it as an end of the year podcast and offered to my audience that they might want to look back on their relationship with the sport, right? Thinking about what their relationship is. And I know you've been obviously involved in cycling and industry your whole life pretty much, right? So you've seen it all, I'm sure. And the archetypes that come to mind when I think about cycling and a lot of common people that we encounter in the sport, there are people who are really driven and they want to, smash all the watts or win all the races. And so I asked the question, what is your relationship to sport? Like, why do you feel that cycling is a means of expression for that type of emotion? And the second question then is, if that's the case, then is that serving you, right? Is it really getting anything done? Or are you just sort of stuck in the washing machine of, I'm angry at my dad, so I want to smash pedals or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then the other one is sort of, I've built this world, this adult life. I've got this wife and these kids, or this husband and these kids, or this job. And I'm not necessarily doing that well with the tension that I've created or the mess that I've made. And so how do I medicate that? Right. And that's simplistic. I mean, there are a lot of outcomes that can lead to that situation. And the first thing I disclaim in this conversation, I'm just recapping this so we can maybe kindle things, but the first disclaimer I make is like, I'm not coming to this with a place of judgment. Like, I've been through this 1,000 times. I was an elite biker. So I was a bike racer for 15 years. So I have my own demons to try to expunge and kill through the sport. Right. And I can look around now at the corpses that I've created and look at the swords that are in them and say, was that successful? Or was I just out there fooling myself, riding around in stretchy pants for years? Good questions to ask myself. And so I share that in hopes to kindle some, bit of growth with my audience, because I think for me, how we do one thing is arguably how we do anything. And I would offer that the best way to do anything is with some intention and focus, right? To be present in the moment is to offer reverence to the experience we're having. And if we're just breezing through or glossing over or burying the skeletons, then how are we going to get any good work done? And the maybe handoff point to you in this is, okay, you're a craftsman. Your passion has been to make amazing bicycles, perfect, beautiful bicycles for people. For how many years have you been building bikes, Ben?
I first started building bikes in 1972-ish.
That's the year I was born. Amazing. That's the year I was born. Okay, so that's so cool. So, I mean, being a craftsman for that many years and being in that, like, you obviously have a passion to perfect your craft and to deliver the best possible product, right? So,
yeah, I first of all, I think that's a great, that was a great lead in, and you've captured me now as a new member of your audience, because I to be truthful, as I always am, I haven't listened to a complete podcast of yours. Actually, I've listened to very few podcasts. I listen to the podcast that's running in my head all the time, probably a little bit too much.
Yep.
So I think I might practice your method of saying what is spinning around there to myself. Maybe I'll hear myself. But it's. I mean, the joy of making things. The joy of making things that can be beautiful. It's bikes are functional art, really, and at some point, I think early on, I was on in much as the same way that I think many athletes, and I was a very mediocre athlete for a period of time, but the sense of competition and why you're driven to compete, and why winning matters, and what does winning accomplish, what does losing accomplish, all those things. And certainly when I started building bikes seriously, I think early on it was my intentions were not really clear with myself. I wanted to make bikes. I wanted to make bikes that were as good as this, and this brand that were historic and the best bikes in the world category. I want to be able to equal that. Then I want to be able to do something that's better than that. And I think so. In my early years, I both was feeling I had that competitive energy that rather than trying to be a successful athlete, I wanted to try to do something really well. But at the same time, and one of the most humbling things that happened to me early on in my bike building is because I had it in the late 60s when I was still in high school. I started a little bike shop that was an offshoot of a family business. So I was being a retailer, bike repairman, and then starting in 1972, 73, I started dabbling with making bikes. And one of the most humbling experiences was getting a call from somebody in town who wanted to know if I could help their son, who was paralyzed from the waist down. And he wanted nothing more than to be able to ride a bike. And so we built a hand cycle, and back before you saw many hand cycles anywhere. And that was an incredibly humbling experience to do that. And it was an incredibly rewarding experience to do that because, the reason I actually got into bike building in the first place is because I found immense joy in riding a bike. So it kind of brought me back to my first memories of riding a bike and the sense of freedom and all that. Before any sense of competition was there, it was just this pure sense of joy and freedom, and then that one transaction or that project of making this bike brought me back, recentered me on that. Oh, okay, this is what making bikes actually can be. It's really not about me and what I can accomplish. It's how can I help the cyclist have a better experience? Mm-hmm. And so that happened at an important time because I was very much into this notion of I've got to do this thing and I've got to do it equal to anybody else, and then I know I'm going to want to do it better, so that was an interesting thing that I haven't really thought that much about. The various switches in the road, that you come to in your journey, and so building bikes building bicycles has been incredibly rewarding as long as I keep that the cyclist I'm making the bike for is the most important person in this project. It's not, and it doesn't get tiring. Making bikes the same way over and over again, that gets boring, and it's one of the reasons why I've been on missions over time to look for new ways of doing things with the hopes of making improvement. But always it comes back to the measure of success is not whether or not we have success in the marketplace. That's important. But the real measure of success is did we accomplish delivering a fantastic experience to the person that the bike is made for? Yeah. And so that's a fuel that always is there as long as the job is as long as the mission is completed, correctly.
Right. Yeah, we were talking the other day on a phone call about the tension between scaling a thing that you make, a product or a service, right? And it's starting to suck, and the challenge there, right? I mean, for me, there's this real, I think of it in terms of this spectrum of polar opposites. And on one end, we have the craftsman or the brilliant artistic visionary who has a widget or a shoe or a bicycle frame or a dropout or whatever it is that they want to make, or maybe it's an app for a phone, right? It could be any product that you have this passion for. And often that starts with your own experience of life where you're like, man, I wish I had this thing, or I'm using these tools, these things, and they suck, or they're missing, or there's one that doesn't exist at all, or I could take these 4 things and take the best attributes and make a brand new thing that would be so much better, right? So to a sense, it's derivative and refining, but also improving. And that whole creative process tends to be in the domain of the creative visionary person. And then the other side is the entrepreneurial, let's scale it, let's sell it, let's talk about profit margins, and let's bring it to the masses. And as you travel from the visionary side of that spectrum to the entrepreneurial side, often the product gets diluted, it gets bell curved, it gets becomes put into categories of orthodoxy, and arguably even worse, the perception of what the market wants, which isn't necessarily actually what people want. And I find this myself as a consumer all the time, because I go into a store, a normal grocery store or a normal whatever Costco, Target, and I look and I'm like, this is an ocean of crap. I don't want to buy 98% of this, and even the last 2% sometimes is a stretch. It's like, well, I can compromise and get this because I need to buy something to fill this need in my life, and this is the best they've got. So you're on the other end of the domain is making something it's a crafted item, handcrafted in your case, but more specifically, it's engineered without compromise is the idea, right? So I love the purity of that. But I mean, I'm sure you can talk to the tension of the balance of, then it's like, okay, I made this amazing thing and I took, 44 hours to make it, or however many hours start to finish. And then you try to bring it to scale. And it's like, in order for me to pay for my time here, this would be a, $28,000 dropout.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, the nature of, right. There's the artisan or designer, engineer, artisan, and a mission, thinking of success measured in one completed project at a time.
Yep.
And then on the other hand, yes, there is in our earliest years in trying to make this a business, I almost never thought about how much money is this going to make or not, because I was more focused on getting it right. And and I don't say that proudly necessarily. I mean, you can't having operational profitability is essential to being able to if the goal is, or if there an assumption is, there will always be another good idea or another next step or another better way of doing things, whether better means delivering something equally excellent that costs less to do, or equally excellent that you can be more consistent at delivery, or equally excellent that everything is about the same, but I'm actually making more money here. Profitability allows you to pursue the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Yep.
And so that certainly took a little while to settle in. And, I think to me, the greatest challenge is, and I think this is even far more so today than it was 10 or 20 or certainly 30 years ago, is that the market, whatever you want to describe as a market, the other market forces, competitors, other companies, work very hard to convince you convince everyone in the marketplace what they really need or what they really want. You really want this thing. You really need this thing. And there's it's a powerful amount and well executed messaging that is out there. And you know, in the realm of bike fitting, I had a phone call a couple of days ago from a bike fitter who I talk to, you know, every year or two, and he just needed to unload on somebody. He was complaining that he was wanting to set somebody up on a new bicycle, and he contacted. They selected one of the small handmade brands, and they wouldn't take the order for this bike because this particular cyclist was not did not have the flexibility of somebody who has taken great care of themselves, or maybe she didn't even ask. It could have had an arthritic problem or something, but could not make themselves comfortably look like a pro cyclist. But this brand has made a decision that they weren't going to build bikes with tall head tubes or with extensions on the head tubes, and you know, this needed this. You know, the only bikes they wanted to build were bikes that ticked off all the boxes of the things that everybody wants to be a part of. You know, I want to look like I'm really young and really fit, and I've got the really cool stuff. And sometimes the reality is that just comes. You just can't build a bike that way. If the goal is to build a bike that somebody will actually love to ride, and so you know that's an everyday thing, you know, here, and it's fun. You know, we back in our peak years, peak in terms of volume and how many people knew about what we were doing. We were known for making race bikes, right, and everybody wants to drive a real race car and wants to be like that guy or that woman who's going fast. That's not reality, you know. And so we were known at that time, particularly in the 80s and 90s, as having the hot race bike, and the bike fitting venture that I went on, you know, just developing this process and iterating on this thing we call the cycle, and training sales staff in bike shops how to make somebody comfortable and efficient on a bike, and they aren't necessarily going to fit that bike over there. We became known as the company that knew how to make bikes that people could ride and enjoy riding, and therefore they would ride more. And we actually inadvertently sort of submarined this notion that we're the company that makes the hot race bikes. And so we were trying to be honest. We were being honest with our customers and trying to build the bikes that they would ride more than anything else. And anyway, so there is that tension. So, and then as far as growth and scalability, you know, I think there's nothing wrong with scaling, being able to scale. The challenge is, can you build a business and scale a business and deliver excellence to the consumer, to the customer
at the end? Yeah.
And so that's always been, you know, a core principle that I try to stick to. Now we're sort of standing at the base of a mountain again right now. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about bike fitting, more so than I had for quite a few years, because there was a long stretch of time that I had become kind of the conductor of this orchestra, and I wasn't doing any of the bike fitting myself any longer. We trained a lot of people in bike fitting, and I had become more removed from the relationship with the cyclists that I had in our earliest years, like the time I built the bike for the young man who needed a hand cycle,
Yeah.
And so the last few years has been a sort of a re-examination of purpose. Why do this?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm coming back to scalability, growth, and profitability. Profitability allows you to keep pursuing the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are quite a few small frame builders who do make extraordinarily beautiful bikes, well-made bicycles, and their single mission is to make a small number of extraordinarily beautiful bicycles, and that's totally fine. I mean, that's great, but that sort of doesn't excite me. So what excites me is trying to deliver something that really delivers a better experience for each cyclist, and it is part of that. And it's sort of the personalization is my theme, and that the every one of us is different, and rather than trying to build a bike and then find somebody that matches that bike, or you're facing 1,000 choices of bikes that look fairly similar, and the companies are saying very similar things about all those bicycles. Why should it be that way? And there's probably 10 bikes that are sitting in a warehouse someplace, at least 10 for every person that is interested in buying a new bike today. And there's just inventory everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so, to me, what excites me most now is thinking about how can we get to the point that every cyclist, at whatever level they are in terms of competitiveness, whether they're not even interested in competing at all, they just love riding a bike. Everyone deserves to have the right bike, and without wondering whether or not they're getting the right bike. Just so I think next phase is trying to capture how to deliver that experience, and how to be able to deliver that experience in a scalable way. And so the fire is there for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's the definition of a sustainable fire, right? Is when you can continually weave your passion into your profession. So that's good. I think the world would be a better place if more people did that, or were able to figure that out. It's not hard.
Well, it's not
easy.
Yeah, it's obvious, and it's definitely not easy. But it does come back to your one of your first points here is why are we doing the things that we're doing, and are we actually accomplishing something that is actually meaningful to us or meaningful to somebody else, or preferably both?
Yes.
And then that makes a good life.
Mm-hmm. So what's on your mind right now? You said you came back to thinking more about bike fitting because you're doing less high level stuff in terms of running your company and your legacy. What do you see are the current issues in fitting? Like, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What problems are you trying to solve? And what do you think is maybe changing in bike fitting? I feel like there's been a lot of change even in the last few years.
Yeah. It's, I think the older I get, the more I realize how little I knew,
Right.
And
that's the evolution. That's the journey. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. Boy, I really didn't know a whole lot then, but I thought I did.
Yes.
And so I mean, it's a funny thing. The more distance you have ground that you've covered, the more you see that there is to go.
Yes.
And it's just which is exciting. It's it can make you feel small, but I think in my sort of re-entering the realm of actively doing bike fits. One of the things that has been a disappointment is for all the effort that the bike training schools, we'll call them. We had certainly one of the first, and then there have been many versions of that. From a consumer standpoint, there's a horrible level of consistency, or a high level of inconsistency. People, so many people that I speak to have had bike fits, and they're skeptical about getting a bike fit.
Yeah,
because they've gone to 3 year, or sometimes many more different bike fitters, and had very different advice. And I think it's a shame. There's a professional. It would be great. I don't have the energy to try to drive this, but I think the bike industry, by and large, has kind of failed at establishing a reliable platform. It's complicated. I mean, on the other hand, you probably you'll end up finding the right doctor that works for you, or the right physical therapist. Not all physical therapists. The diploma is a part of it, and training is certainly a part of it. But there's a lot of other things on how much somebody really knows, how much they're willing to admit that they don't know, knowing right. when they need to hand somebody off.
Yes.
And so anyway, it's been disappointing for me to discover how much inconsistency there still is. And I don't really have I don't see a clear way of how I can move things to change that. Although you may well know more about this than I do, but there's a number of groups who are trying to consolidate practice, practical experience, and and so that's a challenge. And I think modern technology, there's probably half a dozen or more companies talking about utilizing AI as part of bike fitting, whether it's bike fitting, coaching, any of these things, and in medicine, it's certainly is part of the future. You're based on your blood and DNA, medications will be prescribed based on some massive set of algorithms that pool information. And I think that in concept that's okay, but I think that one of the challenges in the bike industry right now, if we are to try to consolidate information, is that how do we make the average cyclist purchasing experience, or really taking a step back, how do we make the average cyclist riding experience the best it can be? So that doesn't just mean from a performance standpoint, but so that they can ride longer and enjoy riding longer. They can ride longer in life, not just longer at distance of the ride. But ultimately, really, that's sort of that would be the measure of success of the industry banding together and embracing some path to a process that is consistent. The change in bike fitting, I think one of the changes that it's been obvious to me is that we were teaching people how to fit. Initially, we were teaching people how to fit to make a custom bike, which is a sort of different mindset than teaching people how to accommodate a fit on a bike that already exists. So the vast majority of bike fitting that takes place in bike shops or even at bike fit studios is helping somebody fit a bike that they already own or a bike that they just bought in a box. Yep. How do you improve their position on that bike so they can have a better riding experience? And that which is totally great. I mean, it's better to help that process, but what I found is that there are very few bike fitters who can just see a clean sheet of paper, a body in space, and find the ideal relationship between contact points and look and understand the cyclist well enough as they're seeing him or her to understand what that cyclist's trajectory is likely to be. Now, are they going to become more flexible, more fit? Is this chronic problem they have something that really isn't going to be able to be helped that much, and so we have to plan for something in the future. And so that's one of my challenges. Really, is okay. There's there are a lot of fitters out there, and some of them are pretty good at fitting in a certain way, or be pretty good at being able to fit kind of the middle of the bell curve, which leaves another 50% of the population less well served. And so it's it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
What is your perspective of the change that you've seen? Maybe I'm being overly skeptical.
No, not at all. Not at all. I agree. I think that there is inconsistency. I mean, first I'll acknowledge that as a fitter, whatever niche I've managed to carve out of the market through my, advertising, which is basically my podcast, and my exposure and word of mouth, I end up with a particular cross-section of people, right? So that means whoever walks through my door, I'm biased because I see, you think that you just see everybody, but of course I don't. I see people who come to me who have probably been through at least 3 other fits, maybe 5 or 7. Often retool is mentioned, but not always, but often, I think. So that tells you that they're hitting a lot of the bell curve. Mm-hmm. And the people who come to me are people whose problems haven't been solved. So, that's not to bag on retool or anyone else who's doing fitting. Like I know enough as a coach and a fitter to know that really what we're all trying to do is solve the problem of the client, the individual. And we use the tools we have to do that. And maybe we move the dial in some ways, and maybe in other ways we completely miss the mark. But this is, to your point about inconsistency, this is a challenge of bike fitting. But I don't know. Well, I suppose I would like to imagine that there's more consistency in our solution as an industry. But first of all, bike fitting is unfairly held or incorrectly held to a different standard than some other industries. So, for example, let's say you get up this morning to start your car to come to work, and your car doesn't start. Like, oh, crap. So you have it towed to a local garage, or maybe you jump in and get it to the garage, and then you tell the mechanic, hey, man, my car doesn't start. I need you to fix this problem. And then they work on your car for 3 days, and then you go back and you pay them $2,000 or $500 or whatever it was, and they fix your car. And then you start it up and you drive it home. And then the next day you go to work and you go to start it and it doesn't start. What do? The first thing you do is call the shop and say, hey, man, I just paid you $2,000 to fix my car and it doesn't start. And presumably they would work with you on their expense until they solve the problem, right? If they were a garage that offered customer service and backed up their work. But in bike fitting, that's not the way the industry works. You go pay whatever, $50, $100, $300, $500 for a bike fit with someone, and they throw all this technology at it, or maybe they don't. It doesn't really matter. They throw whatever tools they have at it to solve the problem you're having. And then 6 months later, you've still got back pain, knee pain, shoulder pain, subscapular pain, hand numbness, foot numbness in your crotch. pain and tingling, etc. All these individual outcomes of cycling that are problematic, and the problem wasn't solved. And Steve Hogg, my fit trainer, has tried to solve this problem by offering a money back if not satisfied guarantee, which is a noble offering, but also in the real world doesn't always actually work out, because we know statistically that even patients who have an ironclad case to sue their doctor in the case of malpractice often won't sue their doctor. And when asked why, they say, well, he or she did their best, and I really like that person, so I don't, I know they were trying.
Yeah.
And so there's this, equation of of human element to it, where you know that someone's actually doing their best to serve you, and maybe they fell short of the goal. And sometimes that even happens with something as clear cut as your car. We went through that with my wife's we have an old 2011 BMW, and for years it had electrical problems that we couldn't solve. And it's like, oh man, we just kept going to garages, because there was a point when they were like, we've done everything we can. So there's a point when the bike fitter says, I've done everything I can and I can't figure this out. Or I raised your saddle, I lowered your saddle. So it's very complicated. Also, the other factor is sometimes someone comes to you and they've been to 4 fits or 5 fits. And so you ask them, you give them your questionnaire. My questionnaire is up to, I think, 66 questions now, right? And it's like, what's your injury history? And what saddles have you tried? And what footbeds have you tried? And what haven't you tried? And this and that. And so there's a certain amount of musical chairs. So sometimes someone comes to you and they're like, well, I went to this one fitter and they slammed my saddle super high and put me all the way forward. And then this, and this happened. So I started to scooch back from that. Or conversely, well, then I went to another fitter, and you can see the logic. It's like, well, that didn't work, so we got to try something else. It's what my colleague Jerry Gerlich would refer to as the reverse toe-in problem, which is you try everything under the sun to try to get your brakes, in the back in the day of rim brakes. Sometimes you just have these brakes that make these horrendous squealing noises, right? And it's like you do all the right things. You grease the pivots and you replace this and you replace that and you put new pads in, and then you try new rims and everything still squeals. Or the other problem that's like that is shimmy, right? Which is like this nebulous, weird, like someone's got a really bad speed wobble, and it's like, how do we solve this? And after a while, you start to mix analogies. You start looking for your car keys in the freezer, because they're not in your pockets. They're not on the key hook, right? They're not in between the couch cushions. It's like, where the hell are my car keys? And then finally you're like, okay, we've looked everywhere they should be 5 times, and we've looked everywhere they shouldn't be 5 times. Now we have to start looking on Mars for them. We have to start looking in the freezer or in the cereal cupboard, because obviously there's somewhere that's inexplainable to our rational mind. That's reverse towing. Sorry, I just used like 6 analogies to explain this problem.
Well, but you got some gems going there. But I mean, I think, you're right, and I think one of the very the most important part of starting a bike fitting is asking enough questions in enough different ways that your likelihood of getting a full answer is higher. And it's the most basic thing. You never ask a guy how tall he is, or you can ask how tall he is, but he's never as tall. Never as tall as he says he is. Never as flexible or as strong.
Right.
And so there's getting the information out of people, especially today. I mean, I think people are hate taking the time to fill out, forms, whether it's a digital form or a handwritten form.
Yeah.
But it's critical. And, and the reality is whether you're seeing a GP doctor or a bike fitter, the reality is that over time, most people are changing somehow. It's bike fitting. Even if you have the average cyclist, even if they found the perfect bike fitter for them, they need a checkup every now and then. There's going to be things that crop up because most people change. Not all, but most people
100%.
change.
Yep.
And so it is, there's that. And so I think part of this is bike fitters setting realistic expectations of themselves on what they're sharing with their potential clients, what they're capable of. Mm-hmm. And then there's sort of the flip side of that is letting cyclists know that here's how we can help you, and but probably most likely there's going to be something. The goal is that you leave here, or when you have your new bike, or when we set up this bike, that you're going to feel better as a cyclist than you did before. Mm-hmm. Or you're going to have to ride it. If you're willing to make these changes, there's also that. If you say you want to do these things, then we're going to assume that you're going to do these things that you're saying you do, because if you don't, this change position isn't going to be so.
Isn't going to work, right?
So it's being able to have a very honest dialogue mm-hmm. with yourself as a fitter and with your client as a consumer of your services. What expectations are, and I think that's something that a lot of people have a hard time doing, especially you need to be honest with yourself so you can be honest with your client, including saying, well, if you develop this, and this, I'm not the person, I'm not medically trained to be able to do that, or I don't have the experience enough to do that, but here's a resource. Here's where you would go then, but right now you don't need that. So we're going to do this first. So it's just, I like the money back guarantee notion, and I don't think anybody should be in business if they're not willing to say that. We don't have money back guarantee on our website or anything that we hand anybody. And I'm not sure why we don't. I've always thought it seemed kind of cheesy to say that, but I don't know why. But mm-hmm. if a question comes up, and it does from time to time, I always tell people, look, our promise is that you're going to love this bike. Mm-hmm. And if you don't love this bike, we didn't do our job. So we're going to make sure you love the bike, and you have to let me know if you don't, because we're not going to let you have a bike that you're not in love with. And
that's a great way to do it.
That's it's sort of an element. It's elemental to the notion of what we do.
I mean, the way I think about that is we have to be able to lay our head down at night on our pillows and get a good night's sleep. And if I have customers out there that I've sold products to that I know didn't serve them, I'm not going to be able to do that. I can't lay my head down at night. And I mean, when we check out into dream world, that's when our unconscious rises and tells us the things that aren't quite working in our lives, right? That's why we have stress dreams. And so I don't want to be having my nights filled with more work dreams or more stress dreams about my occupation or how I'm serving people. I want to be able to go zoom off into, unicorn land or whatever and have adventures. That's what sleep is for, is to detach from the waking world and go have adventures and process things. But I agree. I think that's a really nice way to put it. And I think some of that comes down to Australian culture. Like Steve is Australian, and they have a different nuance and way of doing things, communicating. So he's got the guarantee right there on his website. But I have customers who ask me that.
I'm not belittling anybody who does that.
No, I know. Yeah.
Not at all. And maybe maybe
I know what you mean.
Time to be more upfront about that. I think in terms of custom bikes, I think they're one of the things we the two of the barriers that cyclists will have are in terms of deciding it's okay to go for a custom bike is one is I'm not worthy of it. why should I, I don't deserve, I don't need a custom bike. I'm just a cyclist.
Mm-hmm.
And to which I say, it's like, do you feel yourself unworthy? Do you value, how much isn't time the thing that your life experience, isn't that what you most value? Your quality of your time and everything. Mm-hmm. And the other is I worry that it wouldn't be right. It's like, and so I want to be able to touch it first. And I say, okay, well, so what happens the last time you went into a bike shop and like touched the bike because you wanted to see it before you walked into the shop and somebody rolled out a bike and you squeezed the brake levers. That's what, it's like you're not really experiencing the bike until you really, ride it. And so, and so there's those two things that we have to kind of help people get comfortable with. Is one, it's not a question of being worthy or not. If you feel that somebody else's time is more important than yours, well, then you got other issues. But if you value your time and you love cycling or you love whatever it is, experience it the best way you possibly can. And then you're not going to. We used to try to have demo bikes available here and there and everywhere, and try to encourage shops to have demo bikes. And it's like, okay, look, the truth is, you may have ridden 5 different bikes and you found faults with every one of them, whatever brand they were, including ours. But, we don't, all you can say is you didn't like the way this bike felt, or it felt twitchy, or it felt uncomfortable, but it really wasn't your bike. It wasn't set up for you, and so until you ride that bike is going to feel different from all these others, and so why go through this pretend of letting you try something when it's really not going to be what your bike would feel like anyway.
The whole point of a custom bike is to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like I've worked with other custom builders in the past as well. And the point is to interview the athlete or the rider and really get the essence of what they didn't like about a particular bike. And then you've got to do your research, right? It's like, what size, whatever, to pick random brand. What size Cervelo was that? What size Colnago was that? How did you have it set up? How many spacers were there? What stem angle did you use? Et cetera, all the things. Tires, tire width, pressure did you typically ride? What type of riding do you do? What type of rider are you? Are you a gear masher? Are you a spinner? Do you do fast group rides? Do you just like to tootle along and go ride in the mountains? And then you have this pile of data and you can say, okay, I can see why that geometry or that tubing layup or that bar stem combo, that width and length of stem and width of bar in combination with the trail didn't really serve them, right? Are they using panniers? Are they using a handlebar bag? These weight distribution impacts. And then you have to look at the phenotype of the athlete. Do they have a big belly? Do they have a lot of upper body mass because they used to be a CrossFitter or something, or weightlifter? Or are they super long and ectomorphic, super skinny, long arms, for example? All those things will influence weight distribution. And I know you're thinking about these things. So then you tease that out and you say, okay, you use all your experience as a frame builder and as a bike fitter, which is the perfect intersection, and your practical experience and your own riding to say, this is going to be the exact center of the experience we want to build for you. And this is why we're building the head tube this long, reselecting this gauge and diameter of C tube or down tube, et cetera, right? Is that,
that's pretty much it. It's the bikes, these days, because there was a long period of time in Serotta as a company earlier where we built many sizes of stock bikes, and at one point I think in a particular road model we had 32 sizes, because we had standard short and long versions that each of these sizes. And one day I realized, wait a second, we're building custom bikes here.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah, it's the center of everything we do is somebody. So it's understanding as much about that person, what they do, how many hours they ride, how often they ride, the things that all that stuff, the whole thing. And and we don't, at the start of a conversation with somebody, you don't know what it is that you might do. You don't yet know what you might be doing differently than whatever the last bike is that they had, or how it's going to be different, until we, unpack who they are and what they want to do and what they're capable of doing and so forth. And yeah, so that's what makes it enjoyable, and that's what makes it a project. And some of it is predictable and some of it is not. Every time I think I know, as I said earlier on, everything I think I really understand somebody, there's a little nuance that comes out. It's like, oh, well, that's the thing that I really need to pay attention to more than all these other things, And so everyone is a little bit of an open book.
Yes.
Or you open the book and try to extract. You
open the book and see. Yep. And that's the same with fitting, right? To reverse to your earlier, one of your opening points about how bike fitting is lacking consistency. In my shop on the wall, I have a funny printout of a meme that I found on Instagram a while ago, and it's something like local bike fitter uses random number generator to decide seat height. It has a little graphic of a random number generator and then this guy measuring saddle height, which, brings me to an interesting point about bike fitting, or one of the challenges, I think, that's a real intersection that I think a lot of fitters understand the tension of, but maybe don't even quite acknowledge enough, partially because it could discredit their own expertise, and it could also discredit the industry. But I'll just throw it out there openly. And I've talked about this on my pod before. I did an episode called Why is Bike Fitting is Stupid, right? And I think the primary reasons are, one, integrated bikes make bike fitting incredibly challenging in this day and age. You've got someone comes in with a $15,000 whatever, and it's got integrated, bars and cables. And it's like, well, what can I do? I can move the saddle and I can move your cleats. Cool. And at least we did away with seat toppers finally, especially on carbon bikes, which was a disaster, right? But arguably a bigger disaster now is integrated bars and stem. Not only are the cables integrated, but you've got like 4 or 5 bar width stem combo choices, and almost no ability to change stem angle. Rarely do you have an ability to change stem angle, which is a lever that I use quite a bit in my own fitting.
Yeah.
But so there's that. But the other intersection is like, touching on what you were saying a moment ago about an athlete's function. First of all, it changes over time for sure. Our body is always adapting to the sum total of stress in our lives, and that includes aging and activity levels and stress levels, and diet, right? And movement types. One year somebody decides to take up alpine skiing, and the next year they're in the gym a lot. That's a different athlete.
Sure.
So that necessitates potentially regular tune-ups in bike fit. That said, there are neurological patterns that manifest in an athlete, in my observation. And those neurological patterns are engrams, which means they tend to be locked into your nervous system to some non-trivial degree, right? These are patterns of spiral and rotation that manifest as soon as we hinge on the bike and reach for the bars, they tend to kind of come out in the wash, so to speak. So those are sort of underlying programs that get influenced by our movement patterns and our flexibility levels and our hydration levels and these types of things. But the real dirty secret of bike fitting is that what you're doing is there's a tension in my mind between, I'll mention the philosophy of the big red S for a moment, which is fit the bike to the rider, which just makes me want to shoot myself in the head. Because I've yet to see a fully functional athlete walk through my door. So why would I ever want to do that? That's an accommodation. And I really don't like that word. But the reality is bike fitting does accommodate the athlete to some degree. So this is where I get hung up in fitting. I actually do less fitting and more education. So I see an athlete who comes through my door and I'm like, okay, you want this bike. You want Serotta to build you a bike with, this, 12 centimeters of saddle to bar drop or whatever, this aggressive position. And your stated goal is to go do fast group rides or win the Colorado State Criterium Championships or whatever. That's great. Okay, that's your dream and goal. And the first rule of coaching is don't crush someone else's dream with your own. If that's what the client wants to do, then wonderful. But what I see is somebody who's got horrendous hip mobility and a really poor hip hinge and lower back problems and dreadful thoracic mobility and really not amazing ankle dorsiflexion, right? Which is a slightly complicated way to say, like, you can't really get yourself in a good aerodynamic position on the bike. So how much wedding suit fitting do I do? It's like, I'm getting married. Oh, there I go.
There we go.
Special effects. Woo, wedding suit. Like, okay, you want to win this race next year and you want to be in this super horizontal position with a torso, but the reality is you're a long way from there. So then you're having the conversation of, okay, I'm going to teach you how to get there. I'm going to show you the limitations in your hamstring mobility. I'm going to show you the limitations in your thoracic mobility. I'm going to show you why you can't reach the bars if we slam them down there. And what you're doing is just protracting your shoulders desperately to get to this bar that's way too low and you're never riding in the drops. And we have to be honest with the client at that point. But this is why I think bike fitting is stupid in a sense, air quotes stupid. It's challenging because often I find that really the majority of the improvement is in the function of the rider that needs to be done. And
well, right. Well, I guess the question is how it's deciding how much, where does your responsibility begin and end? And so, and to me, the answer to that question isn't always the same, but what is always the same is being honest with them and advising them why, look, as you were just describing, if what is most important to you is to win races, here's the next steps. Is what's most important to you to have a bike that looks like the person who's winning races in Tour de France looks like? Yep. Well, what's more important, to have that bike or to be able to ride the best that you can and not have your bike look exactly like that? Yep. It's just, and honestly, we've had, it's okay as long as somebody is honest and you're asking your pity, your client, to be honest with you in return.
Yep.
And coming back to the promising the money back guarantee is totally fine as long as the deliverable is clearly understood by both parties.
Yes.
And so I've had some clients who have made incredible improvement over the course of a season or 2 seasons or 3 seasons. So they get close to needing a new bike because their level of fitness and flexibility and mobility, the overall mobility is so much improved. And there are people who, aren't making progress, but that's okay. They have a bike that still works for them and they're happy riding and they are happy taking care of themselves to whatever level they are. And so it just always comes back to, it comes back to being able to be honest and having your client feel comfortable and giving you an honest reply and response, what they're, where they want to go, what they're willing to do. Mm-hmm. And, somebody who has a long transition that they want to make, that person needs a lot more of your time on a regular basis, and you need to let them know. And it's going to cost more every time because this is a process, it's not a one and done thing.
Yeah. You're teaching them over time. Yeah. And guiding them through that evolution. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife has studied Vini yoga with a teacher for many years. His name's Gary Crafstow, and he's sort of infamous for saying at the beginning of many of his classes, it's a slightly skeptical but also realistic perspective. He'll say, well, I'm going to teach you how to do this type of breathing or this type of movement, and I'm going to guide you in how to do it. But if you get confused in my instructions, don't worry about it too much because you're probably not going to do it anyway. And I've often thought of giving that disclaimer slightly at the beginning of my bike fits, but I don't want to do that because I don't want to paint people in a negative way. But, you do see those clients who you come and you say, okay, how's the mobility going? I talked to you about this and they're like, oh, I haven't quite had time to do that. Okay. All right. Well, you're here again and you're still having lower back pain. I mean, that's the part that frustrates me. Like times, if somebody isn't that flexible, and they tell you they want to be, but then you can see that they're probably not really going to follow through on that, or they want to lose weight so they can get in that more aero position because right now they've got the big belly or whatever. And you can see that's going to be a big challenge for them. And you offer them tools and you give them the roadmap, and then they don't execute through it on it, but they come back a year later and they say, well, and you can see they're more or less in the same place. It's like, all right, well, if they're not having pain and they're not enduring pain in their cycling, then you can say, okay, well enough. Like, I'd like to see you optimize your diet a little bit. And not because I have an attachment to you going faster, more like I can see that your healthiest self isn't being expressed. That's how I view it. And I'd like to see that. But when somebody's dealing with chronic pain, right? And then they're still not able to get their shit together and execute on the tools you're giving them because they just can't get it together, then it's like, all right, when do you want to step forward into your own healing? When do you want to live your best life? And how attached are you to this experience of pain? Right. And that's hard to watch sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And I people who find somebody like you who will help them come to that realization are lucky. I think it's one of the whether it's going to the average bike fitter in a bike store who won't have the education or the confidence to go there, or going to your GP physician who really they've got 15 minutes to get you through there, and Happy New Year. Don't eat too much. Yeah. So I think so congratulations to you, and I think and that but there are many people who are comfortable enough going there and are in a position to be helpful are not aren't those folks around.
Yeah.
I don't know where this is headed really, but the role. What is our job as a bike fitter, or custom bike fitter, or a custom bike builder, or anything is to try to. What's rewarding is helping somebody get to some place that they're just getting more out of the life that they've got, right? And if it's cycling, every ride ought to be joyful. You want to give everybody the opportunity that every ride they have is the best ride that they'll ever have, and then get to do it again and again and again. That's like, and how that, what that means to them. It's going to be a little bit different with everyone. You have to carve up, you're making decisions about your life and how you want to spend it, hopefully every day. It's to kind of getting to the point that you realize that life is a series of choices. Every day is a series of choices that you have to make.
Yes.
And, and as a bike fitter or a coach or a health coach or a custom builder of anything, we're here to try to facilitate whatever you'd like to do, and not to mandate anything. So it's we have a delightful customer that then I'm building a bike for. He flew a long way to come here so I could also do the fitting on him. And this is an individual who loves to ride his bike, and he loves to eat. And was pure and honest with himself, obviously, well before coming here, and honest with me. He said, look, this is me. I love my life. I love riding a bike, and I'm probably not going to ever lose this belly, but I really love to ride my bike. And I want you to make me a bike that I'm going to feel really comfortable on. It's going to be really stable. I'm going to be able to go down the hills fast, like I really like to do. Yeah. And so that's what we do. And it's not for me to tell him he needs to change. He's, and I love that. He was a sort of a rare example of somebody who's just really understands who he is, what makes him happy. And, it's delightful.
That's good when you meet a client like that has not a lot of internal friction, and they aren't clouded by the demands of other people's shoulds, as I would say, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You should lose weight. You should be this way. You should be that way. It's like, no, man, I'm going to be myself. That's, I would still offer that the healthiest, if somebody loves food that much that they're overeating all the time, then there's gold in looking at why that is potentially. That's my take. But, and I would, if I were working with them long-term, I would eventually probably try to steer them to shine some light on that. Right. That's why, in my opinion, that's why we're here, is to shine the light in all our closets, look on our shadow side, and really try to understand what we're doing. Why are we here? What are the things we can't see? Look in our blind spots. That's just me. I like to rototill that kind of stuff. Not everyone's there, but I can appreciate someone who lives in a relatively frictionless place or low tension place, because that's less common these days. A lot of people walk around with so much, even just under the surface, they have so much tension, right, and friction that tiny things can escalate. Sure. And that's not a good place to live in, and it's also not a nice playground for us to be on as people.
I mean, the reality is most people fall somewhere in between. We have other people who are very clear-headed. They're very motivated. They want to accomplish some event. They want to do an event better than they have in the past. They want to go faster in a time triathlon or time trial or an endurance ride, and they are motivated. They embrace anything that you can possibly offer them up in the way of help and direction, and those people are obviously a joy to work with as well. And but most people are somewhere in the middle. They haven't quite figured out where they want to be at, and so I'm going to send them to you.
Okay. So to maybe zero in on a few specifics, if you're okay with it, you mentioned earlier, you look back on what the work you used to do in bike fitting or in frame building, perhaps. And you say, okay, I realize now I can see what I didn't know back then. Right. And my mom used to say this to me when I was a little boy. She'd say, oh, only if I could know what I know now, being your age. Right. And I think there's an inevitability to that and a beauty to it, because that's how we learn. That's how we grow, is we can look in the rearview mirror and say, I used to focus on this, and I can see that wasn't really the key thing to focus on. So from my perspective, I can say one of the things looking in the rearview mirror from a very practical and specific standpoint is, I can say on one hand, I wish that I was recommending more people consider shorter cranks. On the other hand, 10 years ago, you couldn't get short cranks. No. Almost impossible to get, right? We had Leonard Zinn making really, really long cranks, and we had a few select weird manufacturers who made shorter cranks. Then the additional problem, of course, which has gotten worse, is bottom bracket standards. And then, 5-10 years ago, most power meters were crank spider based. So then somebody walks in on cranks that are probably at least 5 mils too long, but maybe 10 or 15, and they've got a $2,000 SRM on their bike. It's like, oh boy, how do I have this conversation? Right? Yeah, right. So I would say, but now we're in a position finally, even now post-COVID, like you said, the bike industry is overflooded with inventory by and large. And now we can actually go to Shimano or to SRAM and buy 160s, and they can actually appear in your mailbox 5 or 10 days later. So we're in a unique place. So how do you feel about short cranks specifically? And are there other examples in your own rearview mirror that you can see that are like, I should have been doing this a while ago? I'd just be curious to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, cranks have been one of those things that have been a mystery in cycling for a long, long time. And it's really only it's not that long ago that people who understand how the body, what's more important, this thing over here or the human functionality and movement and so what I think it's interesting that it took as long as it did. It's also interesting. I'm still getting, people who read about bikes and are interested in reading about bikes, increasingly are aware that there's this trend towards shorter cranks and people who are curious about it. I say, well, it's like the trend is that we're not moving to shorter cranks, we're moving towards the right length cranks.
Just a great way to say it. Yeah.
And it's pretty easy. We rather than spending a lot of time talking about it, I'll just set somebody up on a trainer, and I'll just watch them first on their own bike, and undoubtedly whatever their own bike is, what they come in, it's almost always 170 or 172 or 175. And so I just look at them on their bike, and you as you would, and you realize, okay, well, this person is it's going to be a better thing putting a short crank on. So we set it up with a shorter crank in the first place, and the first thing that you'll notice is that their cadence has picked up over a similar level of resistance, and it's like, this feels, it's like, what's changed? Well, one of the things we did is this, and so it's a pretty easy hurdle to get over. People who are concerned that feeling like, if I'm getting a shorter crank, it must be because I'm not strong enough, or you think I'm not strong enough to push a longer crank arm or whatever. And
interesting.
Anyway, it's whatever was in folks' heads about wider handlebars and longer cranks. So that's kind of the other thing.
Yeah,
is come in with these handlebars that are have their arms out at their sides here, and those same sort of thing. You can, without really talking a whole lot about it, you just get somebody in that, so their body's happy, and again, shorter cranks. Shimano and SRAM have been getting around to it, but it's not a full embrace yet. But I mean, I don't think SRAM or Shimano have a 155 or a 150 and that planning right now.
Right.
Maybe they do. But yeah, I think that's the trend is that we finally figured out what crank length should be for most people.
Yeah. And we're destigmatizing it. What I get is the old school, and maybe this is the story I made up in my own head, but I think frequently people equate a longer crank with more leverage equals bigger gear equals more speed. But to me, that's a second grade way to look at really what's actually a PhD level problem when you think about the neurological impact of the larger pedal circumference. People focus on hip angle, and that's definitely, part of the equation. for me, I also think there's an increased incidence of muscle ischemia under longer crank load. And that adds to, it's not just a pinching of blood flow at the hip, but it's actually throughout the muscle. That's my own theory. I haven't heard anyone else confirm or deny that, but
I'll admit to not deep diving into why. I just know from a practical experience, people develop the loose souplesse. You're either the longer crank arms seem to go along with this vision of some stationary thing like an elliptical, or not even like a stair climber. Stair climbers. Yeah, sure. Longer crank arm for this little section of your pedal stroke gives you more leverage, but you've got to bring it all the way back around again. And there's all this travel that you're not really doing anything, and you're getting more and more right and left as opposed to, and so it just for me it's not been scientific beyond what is the evidence of performance, and so I'm contemplating. I'm shortening my cranks. I'm gonna try 165s this year. I haven't used 5s.
I'd be curious to hear what you think. I try to, before I recommend too many clients do too many things, I try it myself and see how it goes. And I bounced around like most athletes from my era. My saddle height's around 72 centimeters for reference. Used to be closer to 5'9", and now I'm a little less than that over the years, but doing my best to stay long and tall, but keep that heaven earth axis alive. But we, for years I was on 170, 172, 5 and 75s. And I even experimented with 180s at one point, but I bounced around, and now I'm down to 160s on my road bike. And I have to say it's been enlightening for me to try that. For sure. I've had some interesting experiences. I won't divulge too many details here just in the name of time, but it's been really good for me to experience it. And then I can speak authentically to my clients on what I experienced internally just to share with them. And then I've had a surprising number of athletes come back to me and say things like, wow, I can't believe how much better these are.
Yeah.
And that also reaffirms, like, looking in the rearview mirror, like, I should have maybe found a way to engineer this better. But, as a bike fitter, look, I mean, the bike industry in the whole is a weird one, right? It's so dictated by convention in so many ways. And it is, and it's not. I mean, you look at, for example, things that have changed in the last 20 years. Okay, we got the shifters to the brake levers. That was a big help. I would say that even with modern electronic shifting systems, which are amazing, there's still a skill to shifting. I just want to let people know that. There used to be a tremendous amount of skill involved in shifting when you have friction down tube levers, right? It was like, it was calculus to know what gear to be in at the right moment for sprint finish.
Like a sports car with the 6-speed manual shift, finesse to everything. Yeah.
Different skill set.
And there's part of me misses that, just like the interaction of getting it right, getting it,
relationship with mechanical devices, right? And I mean, Sean Kelly talks about how he lost 89 world championships because he was in the wrong for the finish, right? And Le Mans won. So there's a case in point. That doesn't happen in modern racing, really. Now we get people who drop chains on the line, or sometimes drop chains catastrophically, because we're, of course, pushing the envelope on narrower and narrower rollers and narrower cogs and, lighter, stiffer, blah, blah, blah. But okay, so that's one advancement is we removed the need for people to take their hands off the bars to shift. That's good. Bicycle saddles have gone light speed ahead, or light years ahead of where they were 15, even 5 years ago. We've got so many better choices now and so many more cup saddles with big cutouts and different padding levels. So that's nice to see. Shoes and pedals have made painstakingly little amounts of progress, small amounts of progress, but we're getting there. And I'm sure through Chris Balzer that I've been involved with the Lore Shoe Project, and that's one enormous, bad pun, but step forward, in my opinion, there. And there's a few other little projects that are coming around to help make shoes better fitting and less archaic. But thinking about bearings too, the only bearing that hasn't gotten bigger on the bike in the last 20 years, the only one that I know of is the pedal axle. And weirdly, that's because they don't want to increase stack height, which is good. But then, Shimano had that nailed with the AX pedal.
Way back when.
Right. And why has no one done this? Is like this most elegant, simple design ever to move the bearing into the end of the crank arm, but no one has done it. There's no way the patent hasn't expired on that. So maybe, to me, that's just a weird one. Like, why have we not changed that?
We have, there is this, it's not a fascination, but I mean, the universal compatibility is that's one of these tension things, right?
Yes.
So making something backwards compatible is the enemy of innovation.
Yes.
And sort of not just backwards compatible, but compatible. And so components manufacturers want every cyclist to be able to use their thing, their pedal, on any bike that they have, or on any crank that they have. So there's that. And I think that's what, Shimano, that was that was like the most exciting component that they ever made, probably, with that pedal, because it was like honest, pure engineering. This is a better way of doing this. And, they gave up on that because the only way that pedal would work is on their crank.
On their crank. And we're stuck with the 9/16 inch pedal standard to this day, which is like, what the hell is 9/16 of an inch? I mean, come on, seriously. Like,
right. Yeah, we've worked to make everything else stiffer or capable of supporting. Yeah. And so that's So the as I dream of this personalized bicycle builds in a scalable way, there's nothing that really fits in there. Being able to accomplish that and having whatever is being made compatible with 90% of the bikes out there, it doesn't work. It's like so that is a main tension thing going on, and so that needs a company that has a lot of self-confidence to come up with that next better thing. Because it has to be a crank and a pedal that is astoundingly better.
Yep. And we've seen examples of that where companies have made things that are innovative and they've kind of flopped, right? Remember the EE cranks, which are still around. And then, that was a very different design when it came out. I have the first pair of those Sweet Wings. I have a pair of those hanging in my garage, and they were amazing at the time. Those were mid-90s. They were light years ahead of anything else on the market. And then Zip came out with that VUCA crank, I think it was called,
right? Yeah,
which was like the carbon version of that, And we've seen a million weird like the bike industry is so cool when you get into the weird nuances of bizarre stuff. There's some goofy things out there, but
it's like looking at car companies, in the 1930s. There are so many car companies, and so many interesting and different and wacky different ways of trying to accomplish something. Yeah. And it takes great design and supported by it's about sizing right. So the challenge is taking on capital to build a business or to support a dream. It has to be the right kind of money and the right kind of mindset that comes along with that, and that doesn't it's hard to find. But Yeah, and I think modern bikes. I think it's exciting. I love seeing the change and evolution. I think that it's important. It's important to love riding the bike more than it is important to love the way your bike looks. But usually, I mean, we once developed a bike. It was the first bike that I know of. Probably wasn't. Every time I think I did something for the first time, somebody points out something that was done 50 years earlier that was very similar.
Right.
But yeah, we did this bike once called the R category. It was a titanium bike, but the rear triangle had an active. It was an active suspension rear triangle, and it had this long elastomer strap on it, and only an engineer would look at it and think it could see any beauty in it. Otherwise, to anyone else, it looked like, well, maybe they're working on some crazy idea, but that's not ready for sale, is it?
Right.
And so you've got to come up with this great idea that genuinely really works and delivers some performance advantage that's measurable somehow. And you had mentioned that the all internal thing. There's definitely a beauty in the simplicity. You can appreciate the frame or whatever shape or form it is. But there'll be a way to do that and accomplish the ability to fit somebody well or make adaptations. It's just somebody has to put the effort and coming up with the system and pushing that, and it probably won't be universally compatible.
Right.
So
no,
that's the job. That's the job ahead is make products that people most of all love to use, and so that they do use them more, and
yes.
And that they love the way they look.
Yes. To develop, I had a conversation with,
and they love the way they believe they look. I mean, I think we find there's a lot of value. I mean, people want to feel accepted. People want, I mean, there are some people who want people to know that they just bought this thing that's really expensive and different. But most of all, people, I think, want to feel good about their purchase, and they want other people to see that they feel good about their purchase, and they want to fit in. They want to be able to. They're out on a ride and at the coffee shop afterwards or the pub afterwards, and everybody's got their bikes hanging out. They they want to share how happy they are, and they want it feels better to have people telling you, hey, that looks like an awesome bike that you have there.
Yeah.
Rather than asking you, well, how come you didn't do it this way? And how come it doesn't have this? And and so, I mean, that's just human nature. We want approval wherever possible,
Yeah. We want to be part of the tribe, right?
Yeah.
We want to have our tribe.
Yeah. And so that's, I think I take that on as an equal challenge in a way to not just deliver the bike that makes you the happiest cyclist, whatever your definition of being the happiest cyclist is, but it should make you feel good in every way possible. And so that's it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
So the mission's never complete. So we're not, it's like it's a good thing. I feel like working.
That is a good thing. I had a conversation with one of my clients recently about the relationship we have with our things. And this was a new kind of concept for her. She was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, we use these things in our daily life. We have a relationship with them. And she had just gotten a new bike. So I was like, and one of the things is she had crashed a couple times in the last few months. And she was talking about being on descents and not really feeling confident. And I said, well, you've just got this new bike and you've had some negative experiences cycling, but maybe you want to cultivate the relationship with your new bike. It's a thing that you relate to and you use all the time. So, it's got a personality, right? It's a thing. It's got, in a sense, you could even say it has a soul. So give it a name. It's your buddy. It's your friend. It's your companion on this ride. It's your tool that you're going to use, but it's also something that you love and cherish. And it's your vehicle for freedom in a sense, or expression. And she was like, I get it. That's a really nice idea. So I was cultivating that relationship.
I believe that we have, when people come here from way out of town, we there's a little bed and breakfast, small inn that we put them up in. And so I usually meet people for breakfast and we talk about, people are interested in knowing what bikes I have. And I think there's an assumption that I have, because I've been doing this a long time, that I must have a huge collection of bikes.
Yeah.
And so I explained that I try to keep my on-hand collection down to 3, because I still haven't figured out how to ride more than one bike at a time. And the other thing is that, I really feel is that bikes deserve, if a nice bike deserves to be ridden. And there is sort of this sort of people not quite having understanding how I would have a minimal number of bikes. I know bicycles have feelings too. You just, if the bike is working for you, it does. I mean, it really, there is a connection. I mean, same thing with, a piano. Same thing with a musician and their instrument.
Yeah.
If working well, it's a beautiful thing. And there is some, crossover between, the living, breathing thing and this object, and that you,
absolutely.
And whatever that is, if you make things out of wood, I mean, I think wood, people who craft with wood really understand that. They get this incredible relationship with their tools, and they, they'll break them in, just so, right? It's just have it. And if you have so many bicycles that you never get to, or you don't like them enough that you just want to, if you don't really develop a relationship with your bike, it's not right or wrong, but it's the way I am with my bikes. It's like, I want to love this thing because it's working so well with me that that I love to ride it, and I'm going to feel guilty if it's sitting there, in the corner, getting old.
Yes,
without sharing some love and joy, which is riding. A bike is just this. It's just a collection of parts and pieces until it's out on the road or trail, and the cyclist is riding it. Then it's a bicycle. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not a cyclist unless you're Colby. But when you're on a bike, you're a cyclist. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that's
yeah. Agreed.
So I think we're in this because we have this appreciation for a life experience, and in some cases it involves a bicycle, and life is great when you're out on a great bike ride.
That is true. Yes, that's why we do it. Yeah,
that's why we do it. So
Ben, thank you so much for taking time today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I really enjoy hearing your thoughts and your meanderings. I really do. I'm going to listen to some of your podcasts. I appreciate the time and opportunity to speak with you and share some thoughts with your audience.
Yeah.
And I look forward to more of the same.
Sure. Tell everyone where they can find out more about you and where to check out your bikes, your amazing artwork.
So our website is Serotta.com, Serotta.com. And best way to reach us is info@Serotta.com.
Okay.
And, you can sign up for a newsletter. We send out newsletters every couple of weeks or thereabouts. And we only work with a small number of retailer shops right now. We're keeping things small with intention. So you're welcome to contact us directly or come here. There's the three retailers that we normally work with right now are people that I've known for a very long time in the industry. Sina Bailey is in the Boulder, Colorado region in Longmont. And then Adam Kaplan in Chicagoland at Peregrine, and Phil at CycleFit in London, and fitters like Chris Balzer, And so our goal is right now. Our goal is always the same. Our goal is to make sure that each cyclist that we work with gets 100% of the value that we believe we can offer, and so we try to make sure that we are as closely connected to the person that we're designing a bike for as possible. And so we're pretty picky about who might end up being in between the consumer and ourselves. But on the other hand, what we want is for every cyclist to have the best possible experience. And if it's not in the cards to come here or to visit one of the three folks I mentioned, four folks, including somebody like Chris Balzer, best way is to contact us, tell us, and we have that first conversation. And chances are we can find a path to connect each cyclist with one of our bicycles that suits their schedule and location and so forth. So,
okay.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for listening. Oh, and thank you, Chris, for connecting us and catalyzing this conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
Good luck. All right. Bye-bye.
Today's lesson from the Tao. The Tao is called the Great Mother. Empty, yet inexhaustible, it gives birth to infinite worlds. It is always present within you. You can use it in any way you want. Hey, listeners. I took a few minutes to speak with a riding friend of mine, Scott Moniger. In case you don't know, Scott is one of the most prolific bike racers in American history. His career spanned 17 years in the US and in Europe. He won a ridiculous number of races, over 275 professional career victories. Just to name a few, he was the 6-time winner of the Mount Evans Bob Cook Memorial Hill Climb, a 4-time winner of the Cascade Classic, 4-time winner of Nevada City Classic, 2-time winner of Redlands, 2-time winner of Tour de Tuna, tour-time winner of Tour de Gila. There's a whole big list after that. Scott raced pro from 1989 to about 2007. Well, technically he turned pro in 1990, I believe. And from 1990 to 1994, he raced for the Coors Light team. And during those 4 years, Scott raced on Serotta bikes, as did the entire team, of course. So I thought it might be interesting to have a brief conversation with Scott about what it was like to race on one of Ben Serotta's legendary bikes. So you raced for Coors Light from when to when?
91 till the bitter end, the end of 94.
In 94?
Yep.
And you guys were on Serotta the whole time, right?
Yes.
And so you were just showing me a photo that we'll put on the Instagram post for sure of, just hold it, of you said Serotta made your first pro bike ever. That was your first contract? Your first pro contract was on Coors?
First pro contract was Coors.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I kind of was thinking that you were on like AC Pinarello or something in between maybe.
Crest was sort of the feeder team for Coors Light.
Yeah.
And that was run. It felt like a pro team. I was getting salary. We had a massage therapist. We had a director. We had, mechanics and everything. So
the Crest was run by Len Pettyjohn as well, right?
It was.
Yes. And then, so the sponsor changed and you guys upgraded to pro license.
And I turned pro a little bit later. I was 24 when I joined that team, even though I was the baby of the team pretty much, or one of. Yeah. Because we had some more veteran guys like Finney and Kiefel and Nickman and Graywall, guys like that. So but it was my first for true pro bike in the sense that I had a pro license, and it was made to specs.
They were all custom frames, or
they were all custom frames.
Yeah.
In the first 2 years, 91 and 92, they were steel. His Columbus tubing was kind of what he was pushing then, or wanting to push. So it had the kind of oversized. It looked like a baseball bat, basically. The seat tube did. Normal diameter at the top, and then down the bottom bracket, it was the size of a baseball. Baseball bat. So it was quite oversized. So
was it TIG welded though, or did it have some sort of bottom bracket shell to take that seat tube?
It's a good question. I believe it was TIG welded.
Must have been, right?
Yeah. Then we started complaining about the weight, and he, halfway through the second year, was making some lighter frames for myself and Engelman. And then by 93, he was doing titanium. So we switched to tie. Those were nice bikes.
I didn't realize he went that early to tie.
Yeah.
Okay.
And didn't really mess with, let's do carbon stays, or let's do some, it was just a straight tie bike.
Yeah.
I'm sure that later on probably morphed into doing some carbon rear ends or whatever. But yeah.
Okay.
That's a bike I probably should have held on to, because it was a really nice riding bike. I mean, not ultralight, but certainly shaved a pound or two off the steel bikes that we had.
Yeah. So. I mean, I'm sure, we probably talked about this in our pod. You and I did, whatever that was 2 years ago, but I'm sure you feel the same way. Maybe not, but I've rode so many bikes over my careers, right? I mean, or my career over the years of racing. I was a pro for about 15 years, and I rode Le Mans and a bunch of brands nobody's ever heard of.
Right.
And, now I can't think of any of them at the moment, of course, but I went through a series of bikes, and there's only really a couple that was like, maybe I should have hung on to that. And one of them sitting right over there, it's my Lotus. I still have that. That just came back from the Pros Closet Museum, which closed down. For audience members who don't know, the museum Pros Closet had a huge historical museum here, well over 100 bikes. They had one of Scott's Serottas there. They had my Lotus. They had a bunch of bikes from Travis Brown and Greg Menard and John Tomac's downhill bike with the disc wheel in the back.
It was a very impressive museum. But I say I wish I had it, not because I want to go out and ride it, because the bikes of that generation just were, I don't know. In hindsight, looking back, it's like that's, the brake hoods are tiny, and the bars, everything just seems really small, and the shifting doesn't work, and the brakes don't work, and by comparison, they are heavy, even though they were light for their era. You pick it up now, and it's like, wow, this is 5 pounds over what a race bike would be.
We're talking 19 pounds, 18 pounds.
Yeah.
Right.
I got one of Ben's down to about 17 with, the CKR tie bolt kit, and the, mechanics would always make me some uber light wheels, using aluminum nipples and GL3,
GL
280s. Yes. 280s.
Yeah.
28, 24 spokes, and then putting, some ultra lightweight tires on them for something like Mount Evans. So it would knock off a little bit, but looking back, I think what Ben did so well was the bikes were really comfortable. They were really comfortable, and they were very predictable. We were doing all kinds of racing. We were doing crit racing at night. We were doing hill climbs. We were doing stage races. Not really a lot of cobbles, I guess, in the U.S. scene back then. But the bikes always felt really stable. I don't ever remember a high speed wobble. And I was a guy, I'm pretty long on the torso, so my bikes were kind of goofy. They were about 52, 53 seat tube, but about 56 to 55 and a half top tube.
Yep.
So not off the shelf kind of thing. And that just kept me from having to ride a stupid long stem. So I could run that setup with about a 115 or 120 stem, typically 120. And then the seat setback was pretty relaxed, I guess, or pretty
like 60, 70 mils behind the BB or something like that.
Yep. Right about 60.
Yeah.
So that worked for me. Not being a sprinter or a crit guy, I just naturally kind of morphed into a more laid back position. But his bikes, like I said, that design was the back end was a little bit shorter. I feel like the chainstays were probably a little shorter than most, but that was kind of counteracted with some longer fork rakes. So the bikes were, I feel like they handled well, and they were very predictable, but also pretty snappy, especially with those initial bikes with the really oversized seat tube.
And they probably had a pretty good amount of bottom bracket drop, I would guess.
Yeah.
Probably more than 70 mils.
Right.
Yeah. That was characteristic. I remember reading about his bikes and hearing how well they descended at high speed.
Yeah, exactly.
Something you would expect.
So I just don't ever remember going into a corner and then having to readjust, or, having an oh crap moment on a descent or anything. Their bikes were just very, very predictable and just smooth. And there's probably, a little bit of a price to pay in terms of the bikes probably were a little heavier. But again, we didn't know any better. It's like if I knew there was a 14-pound bike out there and my bike weighed 19, I would have cracked. But no one was doing anything less than 17 or whatever. So
yeah.
It all seemed kind of relative.
At the time, that was the cutting edge stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think because the wheels were, we always rode tubulars and always had pretty light wheels. This was kind of pre-aero wheels. So we didn't have anything really deep dish or anything. So I feel like the wheels were light. So as a climber, that was a big deal. Even if the frame was a little heavier, or the chassis was heavy, having lighter wheels certainly was a benefit.
Especially for a rider like you, because you're quite acceleration based. You're not so diesely. So you want that bike to be able to be snappy. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And and then I think that kind of morphed into, the last 2 years when we got into like the tri-spoke era. So using those for like flat road races and that kind of stuff, which was the complete opposite of a light climbing wheel. But I saw the benefit of, once you wound those things up, if you had 5-6 guys in a rotation with those wheels, they were,
you could fly.
You could fly. Yeah,
especially at that era, because the delta between a tri-spoke and like a 32 spoke box clincher or box tubular it was like a K an hour on a flat road, probably.
And I think it was a good, those wheels complemented the bikes that we had, like I said, a little bit, probably longer wheelbase, at least, fork brake and everything, so that you didn't get any shimmies. You on the crosswind, you just kind of lean into it. And even as a lighter rider, I don't remember that really being an issue. So,
Buckeye Road Race.
Yes. And Casper, we took those wheels up to Casper and we just wreck havoc on the field. So,
a pair of tri-spokes and a pair of drop-ins and just light people up.
Yeah. So I'm stoked to hear that Ben's still in business, because that's oftentimes I think back a lot of the bikes that I rode, Lightspeed and something like that. Those brands are not even really around, and if they are, it's just by name and not by legend status. They've just been bought and sold so many times, and they've just been kind of watered down. But I feel like Ben has kind of stayed true to what he is and who he is over the decades. So, so it's very cool. It's very cool.
Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. We will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of Cycling in Alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse, as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.